All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for staying with me through that very brief break. And it is now time to once again welcome back to the show an author who takes a unique approach in his writing in so much as he's personally involved in the lives of a lot of the people that he deals with, and the folks that he doesn't, he still gets firsthand accounts. He hosts a podcast that's easily found on Spotify. You can find it on still on Blog Talk Radio as well, I believe. That's called The Cross in the Desert: Speaking Hope and Freedom to Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show once again. Prolific author Randy L. Noble. Randy, first, as always, thank you so much for joining us today. And how are you doing?
Well, thank you, Tim, for giving me a platform for my Iranian friends. And I'm doing fine and very grateful to you to take the time to talk about this very important subject.
Well, we got together not too long ago when a big part of this topic was actually being focused on by the media. But even at the time we got together, it had already started being uh, quietened down a bit, I guess is a good terminology. It was becoming old news for the legacy media here. Some folks were still talking about it, but not as much as you'd like. And the fact of the matter is that things are still going on in Iran right now with the protests that have escalated. It hasn't went away. There was even reports just this past weekend about the Iranian Guard, at least some parts of it possibly targeting the Ayatollah's home with mortars that, of course, was crushed quickly. But all of that is just the symptoms. And in truth, it's been a long time coming. Iran was a free nation before the overthrow of the Shah, and young people in Iran have been longing for that freedom to return ever since. That's something that hasn't went away. Once you have a taste of actual freedom, it's very hard to give it up. But the spark, the thing that set off this particular round of protests that just won't seem to stop involved a murder. At that point, I'm going to step back and I want you to have the opportunity to lay down the groundwork and tell us about what led you to writing your brand new book, Uprising: We Are the Revolution.
You just basically summed it up beautifully. When you once have a taste of freedom, you can't give it up. And that is the spark that caused this revolution on September 16th of 2022. A young Kurdish girl, only 22 years old, just shy of her 23rd birthday, was beaten by security for showing a few strands of hair through her hijab. She was arrested in Tehran with her brother watching. She was pleading, "Ask Khan, don't let them take me away." And she was carted away in a security van. And it was later on that it was discovered, and the media portrayed it as some kind of heart attack that she had. They put a video up in Iran that she had just died, when the truth is she was beaten in custody, and then they came up with an explanation of why she died. She later died 3 days later in a comatose state in the hospital. Her name, it should be so well known, Mahsa Amini. She is the spark that caused this latest round in the revolution. And I dedicated my recent book to the memory and the courage of Mahsa Amini. My book is entitled Uprising: We Are the Revolution. And in page 10 of my book, Tim, I say, "Dear Mahsa, you courageously defied the hijab law. Your unjust death sparked a revolution, an uprising that will never die." And the whole impetus behind this is one slogan that all of us should know by heart. It's called Woman, Life, and Freedom. This is the often quoted slogan of this movement. It's a powerful, indestructible, female-led movement in Iran that is hell-bent on overthrowing a dictatorship government that has oppressed their human rights for more than 40 years. When you have a taste of freedom, you never forget it. These young people know the history of this regime in Iran, Tim, and they know that at one time under the Shah there was freedom, as you pointed out, and now with the Ayatollahs there is no freedom. But this movement is not just about a few strands of hair and defying the hijab law. These courageous women that I document in my latest book are fighting for freedom, justice, and democracy, and it's against a deadly gender apartheid system in Iran.
Yeah. The overwhelming majority of people who do not understand what it means to live in a theocracy to begin with really can't even begin to assume what the dogma dictates. And sadly, there's a lot of people, particularly in Western nations, for whatever excuse they may hold, that don't bother to take the time to even delve into what we typically refer to as the religious dogma when it comes to Islam as a whole. And what's being practiced by the Ayatollah and the mullahs in Iran is a very specific version of Islam where uh, they honestly believe that it is their role to bring forth the return of the 12th Imam, and that
Yeah.
they really believe that both Israel and the United States stand in the way of making that happen. So they're a very dangerous group of people to begin with. They have no qualms about what they believe, though. They are so devout that they're willing to do whatever they deem necessary to try to keep everyone in line. And in that action, they have committed terrible acts of violence on men and women alike since the Shah was forced out of the country. But, I'm always constantly amazed at the people here in this country that will talk a really good game about women's rights and about ending slavery, because slavery is not something that's entirely missing. Uh, they don't call it that, but the subservient expectations certainly reach the level of, if we were living it, we would think that. But just the total level of second class citizenry that all women face in this theocracy, where they basically get no say at all, it's astounding to me that we don't have more support for these folks and that there's not more of a concerted effort. But it still comes down to either a ignorance of the situation, or B, a lack of interest. And both of them are shameful.
It is a shame when you think of female feminists, you think of prominent voices here in our Western culture. Where are the voices for these women in Iran? Linda Sarsour, where are the voices for these women? Madonna, all of these feminists refuse to raise their voice. Well, I wanted to just tell you, in my book, I document why this hijab law came into being and how it caused such oppression to women. I go through the Ayatollah Khomeini instituting the hijab law in July of 1981. And if a woman is caught unveiled in public, she's lashed 74 times. But now I want you to just go forward, because we need to go forward into what's happening now. The current president of Iran, who the Biden administration wants to sit down and do a nuclear deal with, President Ibrahim Raisi introduced additional hijab and chastity restrictions just before Mahsa Amini's death in 2022. So here's what he did. Women who violate the hijab law, don't wear the hijab correctly, they're showing hair, can now lose access to banks, public transportation, and other essential government services. They have gone so far now as to use facial technology, facial recognition. This cuts down the interaction between the morality police, and the women. And they use digital surveillance to keep track of the veil violators. And so what happens is women start receiving text messages in their car reminding them, wear the veil or be arrested. Now, you think about what I just said to you. The Iranian government is using Chinese technology, the Tandy company, to implement this latest way of keeping track of women. Where is the outrage, Tim? It's hard to believe that women on this side of the culture, other than the fact they don't live in Iran and they really don't empathize with them, why aren't they sounding the alarm? If our government was even doing anything remotely close, they would be out in the streets. So it's a hard question to answer, but the feminine voices are completely silent.
Yeah. And what's even more important for everyone to keep in mind is that when these women get these messages, it's not a recommendation, it's not a
Oh,
suggestion, it is
mm-mm,
a final warning. And the women that you talk about in the book that are trying to lead this revolution, that are trying to just tear back actual freedom and bring it back to the land of Iran, they're doing so under great threat. Their lives
mm-mm,
are in danger just by virtue of
mm-mm,
having their names connected to this movement. And
mm-mm.
there is no recognition of that amongst the would be feminist heroes. I mean, the more we
Yeah.
talk about
Mm-mm.
that side of it, the very idea of what we consider to be oppressed here, any Western country at all, it pales in comparison to what's actually happened here. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about some of the people in the book, especially the ones that you feel like probably are facing the greatest threat and some of the things that they're actually having to deal with.
Well, I dedicated this book to one of my good friends. Her name is Modest. She's an English translator online on Instagram. She teaches English to Iranians and other people. She lives in the city of Mashhad, one of the second holiest cities. One day I was working at Chick-fil-A, and I think I mentioned this to you on the last broadcast. She sent me a text on Telegram, said, "Randy, please be our voice. They're killing us." It was shortly after she sent me that telegram message that her brother got arrested, and then they raided her house. They confiscated her cell phone and computer. I have heard from her maybe one or two texts since then. She's so restricted and so careful because she's under surveillance. So my book is dedicated to someone I know personally that I've met, a beautiful Iranian lady who is suffering greatly. The other people in the book, the names may not be something familiar to you, but they should be familiar to your audience. Hadis Najafi, Nika Shakarami. These are two brave Iranian young protesters who went out to fight against this government. When they heard the death of Masa Amini, for instance, Hadis Najafi was never political. She became a fierce political warrior after she heard about this Kurdish bill being killed. When she went out to protest in the city of Karaj, she was shot 6 times and murdered in cold blood for just protesting for freedom. Nika Shakarami, another example. She went into Tehran. She burned her headscarf publicly in a protest, and she was running from the police all night. She was finally picked up by the police. It was not until 9 days later that her family even knew anything about what happened to her, and they were able to view her body. Her face had been smashed in. They tried to say, well, she fell off a building. They had another explanation, or she tried to kill herself, and they tried to show her video. But her mother knew exactly what happened to her, just like the whole world. So I have these women in my book that I tell in such a way that the reader will feel like they are right there in the protest with them. And I wanted to mention someone very special in the book. She's my co-author. Her name is Heather Joy. She has a ministry, Tim, just like me. The Lord put her in my life at a unique time. And she talks about how, as a rape survivor, she is able to talk to Iranian women who have been raped and minister the good news of Christ to them and pray with them and help and share with them what it means, because she feels the understanding about being a rape victim. She knows what they've been through. So I wanted to mention someone very special in the book before we got on any further. Heather is an amazing lady, and she is in constant contact with Iranians just like me. And so she's a big part of this book. She's a co-author.
Yeah. You know, the one thing that has really stood out to me about what you do is you're not on the sidelines. You have developed these relationships. You're constantly reaching out to folks that aren't necessarily the easiest to stay in contact with, but you're on that front line and you are literally practicing one of the things that I try to remind my listeners all the time. When we talk about governments, when we say, oh, China this, oh, Russia that, we're not talking about the people. We're talking about the government, the leadership. So when we say in Iran, I always try to be careful to specifically talk about the government and make that clear. But you're demonstrating that one thing that I always try to remind everyone, and that is when you get to know people, you realize there are a lot fewer differences than that we would think. That we have so much more in common. And that's part
Mhm.
of what makes this fight personal for everyone, or at least it should. But before we go any further, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands this is what you do. You have developed those relationships. You treat people, you're reaching out to people, and you're trying to be a voice for them. And I hope everyone will be sure to pick up a copy of Uprising. We Are the Revolution. And, read this book and get that firsthand experience to get a better understanding, because we're talking about people that are suffering, people that just want freedom. Anyway, with that being said, let me slide things back over to you, Randy, and I'll let you pick up right where you were leaving off.
Well, one of the things that I do in the opening pages of this book is to frame it in the way that I want people to understand that this is a command for Christians. It's not an option. Proverbs 31, verses 8 through 9 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice." That's the command of Scripture. For me as a Christian, that is my passion, to be a voice for my Iranian friends. And yes, we have a lot in common. In fact, Tim, I'm sitting here saying we have a lot in common because we are in a fight here in America for our freedoms. We have a government, a tyrannical kind of government out of control to oppress our freedoms. And as I mentioned in our last broadcast, I have many Iranian American friends that I'm in contact here that say this is the same way it was before the Shah was exiled and before the Ayatollah took control. So, yeah, we have a lot in common. And I want people to know that we need to speak up, because you mentioned in the beginning how this tends to waffle in the media, how it kind of just simmers down and goes away and gets kind of quiet. Well, it was just this past February. Thank the Lord for the Grammy Awards. They recognized a man. His name is Shervin Hajipour, who wrote the anthem song for this protest. It's called Four. And it was, of course, recorded in Farsi. There's now been an English translation of it, but it's a powerful song where he puts himself in the place of his Iranian people struggling for freedom. And he was arrested. 60 million people viewed that video of his song by Shervin Hajipour. And this past February at the Grammys, he was given, in his place, of course, he wasn't there. He's under house arrest in Iran. But an award was given to him for a song that has shook the foundations of the world for being one of the biggest social justice songs in our decade. And I'm thankful that the media is recognizing the oppressed people in Iran in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame though that it's such a limited thing. Uh, we live in a time where we have some of these celebrities that they do this, and thankfully they are helping to bring more attention to it in the process. I don't want to knock that part, but
Mm-hmm.
these folks are also part of the hashtag activism side, so they feel like they did a big thing by giving him an award. It's not enough
Mm-hmm.
to just recognize it. We do have to continue to take action. We have to
Yes.
put pressure on our elected officials so they'll continue to put pressure on the mullahs in Iran so that we can do what we actually can diplomatically and to help bring about the return to freedom and to try and start making right some of the things that have been done to harm these people. Because using the word atrocity doesn't actually feel like it covers it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. In fact, there has been some progress. There has been some things that have been accomplished, I should say, by Iranian American activists pressuring the UN and saying we need to remove Iran from the Council on Women's Rights. Can you imagine they would have such a council? Well, because of what's happening in Iran and what started in Iran this past fall, finally they were removed by the United Nations. So there is a little bit of progress, a little bit of justice, but much more needs to be done. Sanctions are helpful too, but we need to be holding this government accountable. Just recently, Tim, before this book came out, there was a chemical attack against schoolgirls in Iran. And this chemical attack has been actually going on since the beginning of the uprising, but it had not been reported on. There's been over 1,000 schoolgirls that have been poisoned. Now, thankfully, most of them survived this, but their lungs have been infected. They've been sick and hospitalized. And the government even admitted that this was a deliberate attack. Why schoolgirls? Because schoolgirls are shown in the media as standing up against the government. There's a picture of of Khomeini or Khamenei there, and you see these schoolgirls standing up, taking off their hijabs and giving him the finger. So we know that the reason why there was this recent chemical attack against schoolgirls was revenge. One of the girls I wrote about in my book, Azra Panahi, she was part of a group of kids that were made to go to this presentation where they sing this anthem to the supreme leader. It's a song to praise him. And this was after Mahsa Amini's death. And she and many of the other girls refused to sing this anthem. And what happened was the principal got wind of it and called security forces to come to the school. She was one of the girls beaten for not singing this anthem to the supreme leader, and she died. Her name is Azra Panahi, and I wrote about her in my book. So while there has been some progress in holding Iran accountable, it's not enough. This latest chemical attack is something that has got to be stopped. It has got to be. We have to hold this government very accountable for killing their own.
Yeah. If they're willing to do that to the children of their nation, they have no qualms about what they'll do to anyone else, period.
Mm-hmm.
They're dangerous regardless of any other geopolitical aspect that you want to discuss. They're just dangerous people that are dedicated to maintaining their own control. And that's just, again, there aren't enough words, and none of the words are harsh enough. Uh, you've been really good about sharing bits directly from the book, so we're trying to make sure that everybody knows the kind of things you're going to find out there. Is there any other part of the book that you really want to share to try to help send that impact before we start winding down?
Well, there is. Heather, my co-author, has a real burden for one of the protesters who's alive and he's being tortured in prison. He is a very well-known Iranian rap artist, and she calls him the truth teller. And he said before he was imprisoned, if you're not in the fight for freedom with us, then don't bother fighting for my release. He's in prison. He's an Iranian rapper. His body has been just racked with pain. They've poked out one of his eyes. They've broken bones in his ribs and legs. He's a young Iranian rapper. His name is Tomaj Salehi. And his story is one of the last stories in the book. We're doing everything we can to make his case well known all over the world. He's got a big site on Instagram. But this is a young artist. This is a man that wrote songs to speak about what's happening in Iran. He has no freedom to do that, Tim. No musical artist has any freedom. You cannot dance in Iran. Women can't dance with men. Dancing is forbidden. Music is haram. This is all Islam. This is the core of why there's no freedom. But yes, I wanted to bring up Tomaj Salehi. My friend Heather Joy really does her best to make his name known all over the internet. And so I want to, if we're going to wrap this up, I want to end by saying we need to be the voice for this young, talented Iranian rapper who should have the freedom to sing and to protest and not be beaten into submission and not be put into prison.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's all we're talking about here. We're talking about people that deserve freedom, that are being denied, and unfortunately, they get a lot of lip service from folks here and not enough action. We need to do more. And I appreciate the fact that you and that Heather, you're putting in the type of effort required to at least keep people thinking about it, that we won't forget it, because we're so far removed from what actually happens in the streets of Iran that a significant portion of our country honestly believes that it's a good idea to have a nuclear deal in place with the Iranian
Mm,
government.
mm,
It's just so dangerous. We've seen protests on the streets before. We saw it under the Obama administration, where they honestly believed that this was an administration that would back them and support them and help them, but instead
no.
they were ignored. And
Mm,
we have the same type of mentality from the Biden administration, mostly because it's a lot of the same people that are running these
mm,
administrations. But it's just, it breaks my heart, Randy. There's just no other way to put it. I can't find the words to express it. So thank you so much for doing your part to try to make sure that this stays out there. I'm definitely going to try to help make sure that this gets adequate coverage, and at least the listeners of this show will be aware of it. We'll promote the book. One more time, Randy, please feel free to share any websites that you want to. Let people know where they can find this book and all the other
mm,
books, and
mm.
let them know where they can find the podcast too, because it's a
Good.
great podcast.
Well, and Tim, I want to thank you very much for giving me the platform to speak about my Iranian friends. So kudos to you, Tim Tapp, and your wonderful Blog Talk program. You can purchase my book, Uprising. We Are the Revolution on both Kindle and paperback on Amazon.com. The podcast you're referring to, you can see it on my Blog Talk Radio, just like yours, and also on Spotify, The Cross in the Desert. So these are the key places to interact with me. You can go to my Facebook page, too, Randy L. Noble, Noble. And just please, if you go there, share the stories of these women. Every day I post something about them. And the key to this, Tim, is awareness. It saturates. It gets out there. And, of course, pray for them. Speak out and pray is what I feel is so important to make a difference in supporting my Iranian friends.
All right. Again, thank you so much, Randy. And I do hope we can get together again soon, continue the conversation, because there's a lot more that needs to be said here. And beyond that, I would really like to be able to discuss this topic and have a lot of good news to talk about. And I have a feeling that
Right.
as long as we keep at it, we will get there, because that change, the spark has finally happened. They're having this real struggle to try and squash out those embers, where we've seen them put down these type of protests before relatively
Mm.
quickly.
No.
It doesn't seem to be going away. And like I mentioned
Uh-uh.
earlier, we see this situation where there has been a crack, if you will, even in the highest levels, because we're talking about Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, some of the membership there who's supposed to be so drastically loyal. Some of them have started to side with the protesters too. So
Yes.
I, I really believe that it's still not going to be overnight, but this may be what finally brings freedom back to Iran. At least I pray
Well,
for it.
I want to back up what you're saying. On the very back of the book, I say this: woman, life, freedom. is a movement destined to bring an end to the dictatorship government in Iran. They are rising up from their ashes of discrimination for freedom, justice, and democracy. This is their story. It's not going to end, Tim.
I believe it. I believe it. Thanks again, Randy, and we will get back together sometime soon. Thank you for letting me know that the book was out, and thank you for coming on again. I appreciate it, sir. Godspeed.
Thank you so much.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Randy L. Noble, and you can find him on Facebook. I highly recommend you boogie on over to either Blog Talk Radio or to Spotify. I know a lot of you folks are listening directly to Spotify, so be sure to subscribe. Help him out. And, while you're over there, you can subscribe to Tap Into the Truth while you're, and it certainly isn't going to bother me at all, I promise. Guys, just get out and remember, this isn't just a discussion. You need a copy of this book so you can feel what's really going on, but we also have to continue to act. Pray on it, like Randy said, but also reach out. Our elected officials can still do so much more than they are doing. We need to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back after this very brief break.